Auburn Eyes, written and narrated by Corson. Chapter 1. The Importance of Art. You know, the doctor and the artist have much in common. The doctor tends to the weaknesses of the flesh, the infirmities of the mind, and artists, too, are healers. Their art is nourishment for the human soul. Without it, we wither and die. Yumi sat in a packed hospital auditorium, intently listening to the lecture being delivered by Dr. Samuel Alexander on the interwoven nature of the arts and sciences. Yet the question remains, who's to heal the healers? Dr. Alexander asked the crowd before him. I suppose we'll just have to look after each other. As Dr. Alexander finished his lecture, the multitude of doctors, medical students, and art aficionados came to their feet and gave him a resounding round of applause. Yumi was startled by how quickly everyone around her stood to clap, and she hastily hopped to her feet in order to join in the praise being offered to the good doctor. While Dr. Alexander bowed politely to the cheering of the masses, the director of the hospital walked on stage and shook his hand while addressing the auditorium. I would like to thank Dr. Alexander once again for coming all the way from the United States to honor us with this wonderful lecture. Oh, no need for all that. Dr. Alexander waved his hand dismissively at the praise. I was in the Iwate Prefecture for business, so I thought I may as well stop by my old stomping grounds here in Shimaoka. Looking over the crowd, the retired physician ran a hand through his white hair. How about I take some questions before I head out? Excellent, the hospital director said as he happily clasped his hands together. As the vast majority of the lecture attendees filtered out of the room, Yumi stood up and began to walk towards the auditorium stage. Rehearsing what she wanted to ask him in her head, Yumi looked back up to Dr. Alexander, who had already been surrounded by about a dozen or so people that were all fielding their questions to him. Dr. Alexander, one young medical student shouted to get his attention, why did you shift your studies to art? My personal interest was somewhat negligible in the beginning. I took up painting after I retired from surgery as a hobby, idle hands and all that, Dr. Alexander answered, looking at the back of his left hand. But as I learned more about the mediums of art, I grew to appreciate the multitude of artistic expression among varying cultures and how it reflects philosophical evolution. Art allows one to see the growth, perspective, observation, and interpretation of a people throughout time. Another question came from the crowd as soon as the first was answered. But doctor, how exactly does art allow someone to see the growth of a culture? Turning to the provider of the follow-up question, Dr. Alexander cleared his throat. Because of the socio-technological balance, young man. All scientific advancement is due to intelligence overcoming and compensating for human limitation. Think of it this way. Beginning to slowly pace back and forth, Dr. Alexander animatedly continued to answer the question. If you're unable to carry a load, you invent the wheel. If you can't catch food, you invent the spear. Without limitations of the human body, there would, in turn, be no advancement. Think of the difference in life between the medieval age and that of the Renaissance. Not just in the aspect of artwork, but that of everyday life as well. Thereby, without advancement, culture would stagnate. As people continued to approach Dr. Alexander in order to ask questions, Yumi began to feel a bit apprehensive. She had wanted to speak to Dr. Alexander ever since she read his novel, but she couldn't bring herself to just walk up to him with all those people around and try and shout out a question above everyone else. What if I ask a stupid question? Yumi whispered to herself. What if everyone laughs at me? Shifting in place slightly as she let people pass by her, Yumi checked the time on her phone. It was already 6:45, and her curfew was at 10 o'clock. Looking back up from her phone to Dr. Alexander, Yumi decided it would be best to just wait until everyone else had asked their questions. So Yumi slipped her phone back into her school bag, sat down, and waited. Yumi meekly called out as she neared the auditorium stage, getting Dr. Alexander's attention as he was preparing to leave the room. Excuse me, Dr. Alexander responded in a friendly voice. Yes, young lady? As he walked over to address the girl at the front of the stage, Dr. Alexander uttered out an apology. I'm terribly sorry, I thought that everyone had left. Finally close enough to get a good look at the girl without his glasses on, he noticed her uniform as he stopped by the stairs. You're not a resident of this hospital, are you? No, Yumi responded, louder than she had intended. Embarrassed, she began rubbing a few strands of her long purple hair in between her fingers. No, I'm not. Sorry. Oh, fiddlesticks, Dr. Alexander called out in an equally loud manner as he walked down the stairs of the stage. There's nothing to apologize for. I'm just surprised a high schooler would spend her time after school listening to an old fuddy-duddy like me. You're not a fuddy-duddy, Yumi said, again, far louder than she had intended to. Self-conscious of her difficulty in controlling the volume of her voice, Yumi turned her face to the side, her cheeks a light shade of red. Chuckling at her insistence that he was no fuddy-duddy, Dr. Alexander attempted to calm her nerves. There's no need to be so nervous. What's your name? Yumi, she answered, looking at the good doctor out from the corner of her bangs, still feeling too embarrassed to face him. Very well then, Yumi, Dr. Alexander said. Was there something you wanted to ask me? Yumi nodded her head as she reached into her school bag and slowly pulled out a book. I was hoping that you could. Yumi looked down at the porcelain white cover and breathed out in an effort to try and calm her nerves. "I was hoping that you could sign this," Yumi blurted out quickly as she held the book out to Dr. Alexander before pulling back slightly. "If you don't mind, that is." "Certainly," Dr. Alexander responded as he gingerly accepted the book from Yumi's hands. He was curious what book of his a young girl would want him to sign. Could it have been one of his medical dissertations? Or perhaps his recent publication on the socio-technological balance. As Dr. Alexander looked down at the book in his hands, he was slightly taken aback. "Automata Anima," he quietly read aloud as he ran his hand over the cover of his first, and only, exploration into writing a piece in the realm of fiction. Dr. Alexander smiled widely as he looked up from the book. "It would be my pleasure, Yumi." Reaching into his jacket pocket to retrieve a pen, he noticed the time on his watch. "Oh my, it's 9 o'clock already." Furrowing his brow in thought for a moment as he uncapped his pen, Dr. Alexander asked a question of his own. "Did you wait this long just for an autograph? You could have come up and asked for one at any time." Oh, Yumi blurted out. "Well, I didn't want to interrupt. You just seemed like you had a rhythm going." She wrung her hands together nervously. "And I didn't want to throw you off course." "Ah, I see. Well, no matter," Dr. Alexander said as he turned his attention back towards the book in his hands. "But you know, I wouldn't have expected that a young lady such as yourself would enjoy my novel so much. It can be a bit melancholic at times." Well, the novel's setting is so unique and interesting," Yumi replied. "I just kind of got engrossed in it. And well," she trailed off before continuing, "kind of relate to the protagonist." Nodding his head, Dr. Alexander could see the similarities between the girl in front of him and the girl that inhabited the world of the book in his hands. As Dr. Alexander was about to begin writing in Yumi's copy of Automata Anima, he paused as he heard her start talking again. "I've always enjoyed writing poems especially, but I wanted to try and write a story of my own." She paused, trying to work up the courage to ask the question that she had been rehearsing in her mind since his lecture concluded. How do you write a good story?" Dr. Alexander thought for a moment before letting out a hearty laugh, and Yumi felt anxiety rush over her. As negative thoughts began to fill her head, Yumi gripped her forearm tightly as she felt shame wash over her. "That's the best question I've heard all night," Dr. Alexander shouted happily, snapping Yumi out of her feelings of worthlessness. "Huh? Really?" "Yup," Dr. Alexander replied simply. "You see, Yumi, most people tend to focus on the what or why of something, especially in art, such as why an artist created something, or what the intended message of the piece may be, when in reality, there's no deeper message intended at all." Dr. Alexander held his finger out to the side in an instructive manner. "Art is all about the how, or better yet, the process." Bringing his hand back in front of him, he continued. "Reasoning, the exploration of viewpoints, discovering complexity, comparing, connecting, observing, describing, questioning, and investigating," he listed off, counting each factor of art on his fingers. "Those are the parts of art that are most important, and make it such an integral aspect of human society," he finished with a confident nod. "Asking someone why they created something, or what their message is, removes a bit of the luster, wouldn't you say?" After hearing all of that, Yumi was so impressed by everything that Dr. Alexander had just said that she was taken aback, and she began to feel the confidence in her own writing ability slip a little. I don't know if I could approach writing as well as you can." Bringing his hand to his chin and lowering Yumi's book to his side, Dr. Alexander thought for a moment before speaking. "Have you ever heard of an artist named Max Lieberman, Yumi?" She only shook her head in response. "Well, he was a painter, and a talented one at that. He was actually the leading proponent of Impressionism in Germany," Dr. Alexander began before waving his hand dismissively. "That part doesn't matter at the moment. What's important is something that he said." He cleared his throat before starting the quote. "Whenever I see a Franz Hal, I feel like painting. But when I see a Rembrandt, I feel like giving up." So what you're saying is... Yumi thought about the meaning of that quote to herself before offering her interpretation of it to Dr. Alexander. "Take inspiration from the greats, but Yumi furrowed her brow as she continued to think aloud. But no matter how much of a difference in abilities there seems to be, don't ever feel discouraged. She tilted her head to the side slightly, hoping she was close to the mark. Right? I couldn't have said it better myself, Dr. Alexander praised, opening up Yumi's book again and finishing his autograph with a sweeping motion of his pen. Flipping the book shut and lingering on the illustrated gears encompassing the cover, Dr. Alexander held the novel back out to the young lady before him with a smile. Be sure to get home safe, Yumi. Yes, Doctor, Yumi replied, gratefully accepting her book back from its author. You too. Taking her first step out from the hospital and entering into the crisp March air, Yumi felt happier than she could ever recall. Pulling her copy of Automata Anima out from her school bag, she held it up in delight as she smiled to herself. I did it! She exclaimed victoriously to herself. I was actually able to do it! She excitedly opened up her copy of Dr. Alexander's novel and quietly read out his autograph. Man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor. Take these words to heart, Yumi, and may you find your muse. Sincerely, Samuel Alexander. Yumi smiled to herself and enthusiastically closed the book with an audible thump, bringing the object to her chest and hugging it tightly. As she nuzzled the top edge of the book, Yumi felt something nudge into her breasts. Holding the book away from her body, she noticed 2 pieces of paper poking out from the novel's first few pages. Not wanting to simply pull them out and risk damaging her prized possession, Yumi flipped the book open to the page that the paper was sitting in, and her eyes lit up. Resting on the first page of the second chapter were 2 tickets to Dr. Alexander's symposium on the transformative nature of art, located at the town's museum that was closer to her home than the hospital was. Delicately extracting the tickets as if they were made of fine glass, Yumi was so happy that she could feel tears begin to well up in the sides of her lavender eyes. As she held the tickets in her hands, her cheerfulness was soon overtaken by feelings of shyness and anxiety. Dr. Alexander had given her 2 tickets. 2. She didn't know anyone that would be interested in going to an art gallery, let alone someone that would be willing to spend time with her there. But she didn't want to be rude to Dr. Alexander. This was a gift, and to just show up alone would mean wasting a ticket that he was kind enough to give to her. As tears of joy turned to those of sadness, she held the tickets in her quivering hands as she dejectedly asked herself a question under the shine of the starlight. Who'd ever want to go somewhere with me?